Welcome to Liz McMullen Show, episode 86. I have Bev Prescott here, who also was a part of Cocktail Hour Productions. You had this really groovy, was it health-oriented? I think it was called Barbell.
Yes, the show is called Barbell, and I haven't had time to do any shows recently, but the general theme of the show is good health. And, in terms of physical health, emotional health, good diet, that sort of thing. So we've talked about various different subjects within those contexts.
I was actually looking at your website and I saw that, you had that show, and I liked, when I did a search on you, you have these really great and incredibly buff pictures. And it's good to talk about, health and healthy living and making good choices, especially, for the lesbian community. A lot of us don't take very good care of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
It is what it is. It's like, a lot in the straight community, the women often are trying to shape themselves in a way that is attractive to men. And I think with lesbians, often we're just more accepting and loving and just kind of being in the skin you're in, which is awesome. But it's also good to have, healthy choices out there, no matter where you're coming from. I think that's definitely an important message to get out there.
Yeah, because I don't see good health at all, not even in a tiny way, about pleasing someone else, or, the truth is, I'm not gonna say it. It's not nice to have, for example, my spouse think that I look nice. Everyone wants their spouse, I think, to find them attractive, but for me, it's really about keeping my emotional and mental health and physical health as best I can, because I think all three go together. And, when I feel physically, so if I broke my back about 20 years ago. And so just gaining small amounts of weight, anywhere from 5 to 10 pounds, I'll have a lot more trouble with my back. So I try to keep my weight in check, because I don't want to have problems with and I also like to run, so I don't want to have problems with my knees. I don't want to exacerbate my back problems. And I also think that a good diet helps emotionally too, because there's so much, like, eating too much sugar and eating things that just aren't good for you. From my own experience, they don't make me feel very well. So I think it really shouldn't be about what other people think of you in terms of how you look, but more about, do I feel good? Do I feel energetic? Do I feel happy? Do I feel content, not anxious, and that sort of thing? So
it's like a part of like a work-life balance, and kind of being holistic. The reason why parlaying this into the book Blowback that we're going to speak about, and I'll have you do a little blurb in a second. Yep. But one of the problems for the main character was that she did not have a work-life balance, and it wasn't just work, it was, caring for her family and all of her different responsibilities. And, she always got last on the list, and most often not taken care of at all. Because she's so busy looking out for her family, and that she didn't have that balance. And in order to have a really healthy relationship with her partner, she'd have to kind of make changes.
Exactly. One of the things that I try to do with my writing is I try to write real characters who I think are real. And I think that what you just said is something that a lot of us struggle with, is finding that healthy balance between our responsibilities and versus the things that we want to do, work versus spending time with the people that we love. We live in a really busy world, and we're all juggling an awful lot of things. And so finding time for the people that you love, and finding time for your own health, time to exercise, time to cook healthy meals, I think for me, I have to make that a priority, make those things a priority. Otherwise, you lose time.
And, one of the sadder things that can happen in relationship is where even is feeling lonely while you're in the relationship, whether the person is a workaholic or there are other barriers to making time for each other as a couple, that, there's a lot of push and pull. And when I was reading Blowback, I was like, it seems like, for a lot of them, there aren't any good choices. It's just you're making choices between one thing that could be less bad than the other. Right. And it was a very gritty and intense read. Could you give my listeners a little blurb about what the book is about, and then we can talk a little more?
Yeah, so the genesis for this book it came out of, so shortly after the Sandy Hook, the awfulness of Sandy Hook, that following January, the Johns Hopkins University, they had a big symposium where they brought all of these researchers in from around the country and around the world who study gun violence and how to prevent it and what its causes are and that sort of thing. And what they did was they took their research and they compiled it into a book. And I had read that book in the January after Sandy Hook, and there were some things that really, really surprised me that I wanted to write about because they weren't things that I knew about. And I think it's because what we get in the news are the 10-second sound bites, and no one ever sort of pulls back the layers and talks to us about what's like at the heart of what's going on and what's really going on, for that matter. So two things that really shocked me in reading this book was the first is I kind of had that impression that, well, maybe Americans are just more violent than everyone else because, you hear of much more gun violence, many more deaths in the U.S. from guns than other industrialized countries. But what the research showed was that Americans aren't any more violent than other similarly situated countries. It's just that we have access to the kinds of weapons that cause death, and so we have access essentially to weapons of mass destruction. And so it's not that we're any more violent. It's just that when we are violent, a lot of people die. The other piece of this was that of the approximately 30,000 people who die every year by guns in the U.S., like 64%, I think it's 64% of those deaths are suicides. So gun violence is a lot of things. One of them is a public health crisis, I think. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to write a story that was about the reality of what's going on with guns in the U.S. and why they're so accessible and what are the real harms from everyday gun violence. Because as awful as Sandy Hook was, as awful as the shooting in Colorado was, people are dying every day in the U.S. by guns, and a lot of it is entirely unnecessary. So Blowback is about an average family. I wanted to write it such that the average person would say, hey, that could be me, that could be my neighbor, and tell a story of what's really going on behind the scenes every day in terms of gun violence. And so the story tracks essentially the life of one gun. And what I tried to show were, what are the main types of gun violence in the U.S. We have suicides, we have homicides, we have accidents. I mean, you hear all the time about, the kid who gets a hold of his parents' firearm and shoots a sibling. And so that's what I wanted to do with Blowback. And I wrote it from the perspective of an average, everyday, typical family. And of course, all of my stories take place in New England because it's a place that I love, and so it's a place I know. So the story takes place in Portland, Maine.
There, one of the things that I was struck by was the very crisp sense of place. It was a seaside community, it was a lobstering community, and the age and the scarred, floorboards, and it was, very, very real and struggling in some ways. I'm still kind of nestled in the characters more so than following the gun, mostly because, I feel bad for them because, Scott wants to be a good guy. And he just keeps on, he keeps on kind of being trapped into that space, and he doesn't want to deal with it, so he kind of lies a lot. And, I feel like, you wonder if some people are a magnet for negative things happening in their life, or it's just the way that things have unfolded, because he wanted to be a good dad. He wanted to be a good guy. He thought, whenever you try and get rich quick, it's never, it never works out. But he had the best of intentions. And once somebody had the hook in him, then he was trapped. And it was no longer about him staying out of jail. It was about the safety of his family and those around him. And they knew what buttons to push to get him to continue to do this illegal behavior.
Right. Well, so it goes back to one thing that you highlighted when we first started talking, and that is sometimes we find ourselves in situations where we have choices, but they're not the greatest choices. They're not the best choices. And so, sometimes we're at a stage in our life where whichever we choose isn't the best way to go. And yeah, he was trying to dig himself out of a bad situation, and he took a path that ended up being worse, and it involved a firearm. And I just suspect that there are lots of people who think, okay, well, I'm going to get a firearm because it's going to provide me X, Y, and Z, and they get entirely the opposite situation. And so, and I wanted Blowback to be a reflection of what's happening in the real world. And so that's why I think it's, our world is in a lot of ways very gritty and imperfect. And, so that's what I was trying. And I do think, I also try to write very character driven stories, because for me, I have the most passion for writing when it comes from a place where I'm telling stories about everyday people and our everyday struggles and the stuff that's going on right now in the real world. I mean, there are a lot of books I read because they're kind of escapes, and they let me get away from the gritty of the everyday world, and they make me feel good. And I think those are really important books for us to have, and I hope we always have them, because sometimes, life is hard and you need something that makes you feel uplifted and safe and happy. But then there are those other stories that, well, that's real life, and it doesn't always work out the way we want it to work out.
Yeah, when I grew up in Hoboken, and I went to high school in Jersey City, and it's a funny city because, you can be in a nice neighborhood and then a street or so, and then you're not. Yeah. And, the places where I had to wait for the bus and the people that I had to avoid, you get scary things like drug dealers and all kinds of shenanigans. And it was just so gritty and dark and filthy. Like my high school wasn't that, and my home wasn't that, and where I live wasn't that, but it was so much a part of my life that when I was deciding where to go to college, one of the things that I wanted was to go someplace beautiful, and Mount Holyoke definitely was that. I had a choice. I was trying to see if I wanted to go to Smith, but Smith's campus is kind of broken up into the town as well, and Mount Holyoke's self-contained, bucolic, beautiful place, and it was just nice to be someplace beautiful. Yeah,
I grew up in the Midwest, and I grew up in the Steel Belt, so kind of a small, gritty, very blue-collar town was also the kind of place that I grew up. So it's in me. I know that kind of life. And so when I moved to New England, I just absolutely fell in love with the beauty and, in a lot of ways, the gentleness of New England, and so I like that I always have a connection to kind of the gritty, but I've been very lucky in my life in that I've been able to live in some really beautiful places, and New England is home to me. I may have grown up someplace else, but I love, like, Amherst, Massachusetts is right. That's where Mount Holyoke is, right?
It's in South Hadley, but Amherst
South
is a
Hadley.
part of like the 5 college system. So things are either in Amherst, South Hadley, or Northampton.
But it's a very beautiful, gentle place.
Yeah, and the other thing that I find about New England, and it's not necessarily what I'd call a resignation to like the harder things in life, but
Yeah.
in the book that you had written, there's just, there's that life is not going to be simple and easy, and it's not, Scott really needs to find a place of his own, and he has to stop dragging his sister down into his stuff, and he has the best of intentions, but he doesn't continue on through them. And then you have this contrast of like the father who is like really hardworking and, got his boat, but at the same time he had an alcohol problem. And when he lost his wife, then his daughter automatically became the caregiver of the family. So she feels a responsibility towards her father, who has had a stroke and has partial paralysis, and his responsibility to her brother and looking out. And like at one point you said in the book that one of the last things her mother said was to take care of Scott. So she feels stuck. She's like in this little hamster roll, and she keeps on going round and round and round. And then her partner gets to the point where she's like, this isn't working this way, and everybody has that kind of breaking point, or some people just continue to suffer in silence and just feel stuck where they're at, and that's a very real and stressful thing. You're in this position. She wants to be responsible, and she keeps on putting this is Megan. She keeps on putting her life on hold. It's like her dream job, where she would have loved to have gone to culinary arts school and had a completely different life with her partner, but it just didn't work out that way.
Right. And, she also loves her brother and her father. So that's, I think, hard as well. She feels responsible, and she loves them. So how do you find enough of yourself, enough time, enough to give to all those people in your life that you love? And so, Lauren was the one who suffered in that, and then finally had to, something had to give with her.
And I've actually, in my life, I've seen those hard choices there. My aunt has passed. She passed in her early 40s. But both of them they were very young when the 60s happened. They were very young when the 60s and the 70s and the drugs and whatnot. And my uncle was a comedian, and coke and all that kind of stuff, and so they both fell into that hole and never quite got out of it again. And we got to the point with my uncle where it's like, we don't want him to be homeless, but he was not a safe person to be around when he was using. And so we love them, but at the same time, the things that they draw into your world, but it's not simple. It's like, do we, they're still family and we still love them, but at the same time, you have to kind of guard your own family and put them first, no matter what those consequences are. But they're not simple choices.
Right.
There's a lot of, I felt like the richness of the community. I could see the setting very well, the seaside and just the houses and the world building that you did, and the characters, and how in real life things can be extremely complicated and heartbreaking. And it's like, it's the squeakiest wheel, like the father and the brother that kind of get the oil, and her wife that always was kind of being pushed to the side, and that's a really tough situation to be in, and life is like that. So I like that you create characters that are true to that reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting to me because I've had people who have read Blowback react to Lauren in a negative way, where they were mad at her because they didn't think that she was supportive enough of Megan. But I think you hit it exactly on the head, where Lauren still had to protect herself, and she couldn't continue to suffer in silence with letting her own happiness go by the wayside in favor of Megan making the choices to take care of her father and her brother. And I think humans are complicated, and sometimes we do miraculous things, and sometimes we do really stupid things, and sometimes, like we were talking about, we don't have the best choices, and we're just doing the best that we can, and sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't work out, and sometimes we have to just make choices that they're going to hurt no matter what.
When I started reading it, I did have certain feelings about Lauren, and then I realized that you did this in medias res. You took us in the middle of it, and there was they had a very happy and wonderful relationship with each other for many, many years, and it's only been tough for so long. And there's only so much somebody can take, and constantly
Right.
being worn down by that, and not having space, and arguing all the time, and just, constant, because she was stuck too. She was stuck in the life that Megan had. And Megan always felt like she wasn't able, like there was no good choice for her. She's just always kind of treading water, and only so long you can kind of tread water. I think she's, very open and loving the best that she could, but at the same time, you get tired,
Right. And the truth is, I bet that is more common than not with life,
Exactly. And it's, I think that when I write a character, no matter who the characters are, they're very real to me. It's almost like they have their own life, and still stick with me when I'm finished writing a book. And I think it's important to have these kind of harder stories out there, because so many people are invisible in their struggle. So many people are living lives of quiet desperation. And we need the books that are escapes, but we also need to be seen. I guess that's my message this year, is that, one of the reasons why the books that we write are so important is it's making people who were fading into the background, or just didn't live extraordinary lives, or just live everyday tough lives, they need to be visible as well. Like,
Right.
I'm not the only one who's struggling the way I am. Megan's going through that too. And so they don't feel like so invisible, and that everybody else is having a better experience, because when those front doors to a home close, a lot of things happen in there that you don't see when you bump into the person that, is at the bookstore, or the one who owns the grocery store, or you see them at the gym. Their lives beyond that can be much more complicated and much more complex, that it's good to see that they're not the only ones who are struggling, that they're not the only ones who are juggling, what's the least bad choice option that I can take.
Right. Exactly. And that's, again, you've hit it on the head in terms of why I want to write. I want to write these more blue collar, imperfect, but yet perfect characters, because they're us. They're definitely us. And I think that our genre is definitely going. We were talking a little bit before we started recording about the genre, and I think that we are going through growth phases and changes. And so I hope that we can see some new publishers potentially come online, keep the publishers that we have, because I think that all of the books are important, and I think we always talk about diversity in our community, and diversity of books and thought and stories is just so important on many levels and in many different contexts. And so, that's so some will write romance and those happy books, and again, we need those. They provide a really important thing for all of us, but we also need other kinds of stories. And so,
some indie presses and small presses do interesting things, like Julia Watts publishes some of her things with a press that focuses on Appalachia, and Ulgen Press, which Karelia Stutz Waters, she's done a YA book with them, and they focus on the Pacific Northwest. And I think it's such, it all comes down to being seen and representing different parts of the country, different parts of the world. And I think that they're so special, so we have to do our best to support them, because as much as we'd like to keep on doing what we're doing for the love of it, there's also the financial cost of being an author and going to events and promoting yourself. And this is all a very huge challenge, but we do it, for the love of the genre. But it's not an easy road to walk.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. So it takes an incredible amount of time, and like you said, financial resources to get out there and promote. And then most of us have other jobs that we do. We have families, so we're juggling an awful lot of things to write books. So my hat is off to anyone who undertakes telling a story, whatever that story is. That we have to be responsible for writing the best story that we can. So learning what we need to learn, and always being on a path of learning to be a better writer, because we can't just tell a story without that part of it. But again, just out of the gate, anyone who takes that on, it's a lot of investment of your heart and your time. So yeah, I think we should be supportive supportive in terms of saying, okay, we all have to be responsible for writing the best books that we can, and realize that we don't know everything, and we've got to always be learning and improving. But at the same time, be supportive of people who are taking this on, because I really believe that the more stories we have out there, the better for all of us.
Yeah, and it's like we're all in the same team, even though we play different roles. And our time has come to a close, unfortunately. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and we talked about some really important things. And ultimately, the stories that we share are there to touch each other's hearts, and to make our worlds visible, the good ones, the pretty ones, the succulent ones, and also the ones that are a little more gritty and challenging, because we're a complex society and a complex group of readers. And so I'm glad that you're writing the stories that you do, and it's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you so much for your time, Liz, and thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.